Chapter 8 Sign Language. After breakfast, Nancy, Bess, and Nelda hurried back to their cabin. It had just been tidied by Heinrich. He was about to leave, but stood staring at Nancy's brass-bound trunk. Upon seeing the girls, he said, "Good morning, ladies," and quickly left the cabin. "Snooping again," Bess remarked. Nancy wondered if the steward realized it was a different trunk from the one that had been under her bed before. She mentioned this to the others. "Oh, I'm sure he noticed," Nelda said. "I just wonder if he'll tell others." George said, "I have never trusted that man. I predict that one of these days we're going to find out he has something to do with the mystery." "He could be an informer and nothing more," Nancy said. Within minutes, there was a knock on the door. Nancy opened it. Lou, the locksmith, stood there. He smiled and said good morning and added, "I brought something unique to show you." He stepped into the room and took a complicated-looking lock with no lid from his pocket. Then he produced a key with many notches in it. "I thought you young ladies might be interested in seeing this master key and lock. It's something new. I picked it up in Rotterdam just before we left." To Nancy, the mechanism of the lock looked like the intricate workings of a very fine watch. She mentioned this to Lou. "You're right," he said, "and they're just about as hard to devise, maybe harder." Nelda said, "Please show us how the key works." Lou inserted it into the keyhole, then said, "Now watch carefully." The girl's eyebrows raised in admiration as he turned the key and the various parts began to move. The pins, tumbler, springs, the driver spool, bolt spring, cam, and finally the roller belt. He explained each part, opening and closing the lock several times. "Fabulous!" Bess remarked. "It would take a great brain to figure this out," she giggled. "Not one like mine." "This key is a master key," the locksmith went on, "but not a simple one like some. He said that probably only 6 locks were made like this one, but each slightly different. This particular key, though, could open all of them," he added. Nelda asked, "Could anyone order this lock and key?" "Oh, yes," Lou replied. All the time he had been demonstrating the unusual lock in his hands, he was stealing glances at Nancy's trunk under her bed. Nancy assumed he suspected it was different from the one for which he had made the key. She was afraid he might question her about it. If he does, how should I answer him? She thought. Luckily, Lou said nothing. Nancy wondered whether or not he had come to the girls' cabin of his own volition, or had Heinrich reported his suspicions to the locksmith and requested that he look for himself? Showing off a lock and key would be a perfect cover-up. A few minutes later, Lou left. At once, the 3 girls began to discuss his visit. All wondered if he had brought the unique lock because he just thought they would be interested. Or was this just an excuse to look at the brass-bound trunk in cabin 128? Bess checked her watch. "Visiting hours at the infirmary are beginning," she said. "Let's go down to see George. She'll want to know what's been happening while she's been gone." "Good idea," Nancy agreed. The 3 girls stepped into the corridor, locked their cabin door, and hurried away. They found George looking healthy and feeling much better. She was eager to leave the hospital. "Tell me everything you've been doing," she begged. "Knowing Nancy Drew, I'm sure I've missed a lot of excitement." In whispers, the other 3 girls took turns bringing George up to date on all that had taken place during the past 24 hours. Several times the patient's eyes opened wide, and once, Her lower jaw dropped when she heard about the dire threat to Nelda. "To think I missed all this," George groaned, as Nancy finished the story. "But I won't be out of things much longer. The doctor says I may leave here just before dinner tonight." "Wonderful," said Bess. "I have a request," George added. "What's that?" Nancy asked. George replied, "Would you mind waiting until I can be with you before you open the mystery trunk and make a closer examination of the contents?" The three girls agreed and then said goodbye. They noticed an open magazine lying upside down on her bed and assumed that she had been reading it. They were sure the hours would pass quickly until dinner time. On the way to the upper deck, Nelda asked, "What do you suggest we do in the meantime? Some more sleuthin'?" "How about having some fun?" Bess answered promptly. "I'm tired of being so serious. We can swim and play shuffleboard and do lots of other things outdoors. Besides, I want to get some more suntan before we get back home." The girls decided to play shuffleboard first and went to the top deck. They found a court that was not being used and began to play. Presently, Bess said, "Oh, Nelda, you're just too good." The girl from Johannesburg laughed and admitted that she had often played this game at home. "My father is a real challenger, and I learned many points from him," Nelda explained. Nancy had been glancing around at other players and passengers stretched out in deck chairs, enjoying the sun. Her eyes lighted on one man seated by himself in a corner. To her amazement, he was using the sign language of deaf people. "He must be practicing," the girl thought to herself. Interested at once, Nancy excused herself from the shuffleboard game and moved a little closer to the man. Could he be the same person who had been talking to the man on the dock at Rotterdam? The one who had been given the warning message, "Beware Nancy Drew," and N.E.? The girl detective was able to figure out parts of the words the man was practicing. The first one was crew. The second, can. The third word had 4 letters in it, the second one being E. The fourth word had 2 letters she did not know, but the last 2 were N.D. As Nancy watched the last word, she smiled with excitement. She had detected NEC-ACE. It must mean necklace, she thought, and that could mean stolen jewelry. More eager than ever to find out something about this passenger, she moved a little closer. He had stopped practicing and now lay back in his deck chair, staring out over the ocean. It was calm and almost waveless. Nancy walked up to the man. "Pardon me," she said. "I saw you practicing the finger language. Are you deaf?" If he was, she knew he could probably read her lips and understand the question. To her surprise, the man shook his head. "No, I'm not deaf. I can hear very well. I'm on my way to New York to meet my father, who is deaf. I thought I'd surprise him by learning the finger alphabet he has to use now." "That's very nice," Nancy said. She felt, however, that the man was not speaking the truth. Why was he lying? He looked at her sharply. "Do you understand the finger language?" he asked. "Oh, no," Nancy replied. "I once learned to spell my own name, that's all." The stranger rose suddenly, as if he did not want to converse any longer with Nancy. Excusing himself, he walked off quickly. Nancy decided to follow him and see if she could find out who he was. She came back to the shuffleboard court and paused a second to speak to the girls. "I'm on that man's trail. I'm going to follow him and see if I can learn anything about him." She went on and had no trouble keeping the stranger in sight. He seemed to be in a hurry and did not look back. The man headed straight toward cabin 128. As he paused there, Heinrich came up to him. Nancy moved as close as she dared, but turned into an adjoining corridor, hoping she could see and hear what went on between the two men. To her disappointment, they spoke in very low voices. Nancy could not make out their conversation. She saw the stranger hand Heinrich a bill, and after a few more words, he walked off in the opposite direction. Nancy hurried forward and caught up with the steward, wondering why the stranger had handed him the money. Was he bribing Heinrich for some reason? If so, what? Did it have anything to do with cabin 128? End of chapter 8.